Sometimes I just sit there meditating for the like 3 or 4 minutes, and then the ding just shocks me back.
Welcome back to Earth.
Well, welcome back to Earth. Welcome back to Public Access America. His name is Jeffrey. My name is Jason. And we're here. We're a podcast that advocates. If you want to know what we advocate for, go ahead and check us out on Twitter at Public Access Pod. Find our podcast anywhere you find your favorite podcast, even Spotify, and find our live stream noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific on YouTube for now, but maybe somewhere else later. we're just
Never
gonna
know.
we're gonna be waiting for our guest. He had a meeting scheduled and out the hour before that, so his hour ends when ours starts. So I don't know how long it's going to be, but I can't imagine he's going to wait a whole hour. You know what I mean?
That's true.
And I am so excited. The last time Dan and you just had a chance to like be Ferraris roaring on the highway, I loved it. That was a great episode. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, every time we get Dan on's always a fun one.
Yeah. Now, I want to give a shout out to the Loner Podcast. Check her out on Twitter at Loner Podcast One. She has a new podcast, and it's about like spooky stuff and dreams. And I'm going to be on there talking about my ghost experiences.
Ooh,
So I'm
you
excited
got you
about
got
that one.
spooky. You got some spooky happening.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 51 years old. I got a lot of ghost experiences, and I didn't even remember it until I saw her tweet. And it was like, if anybody has experiences, and wow, took me back to times when I've repressed. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, so the funny one was uh Debbie sent me a post on Instagram about the Winchester Mystery House.
That's a cool house, right?
And so they posted an image that said, "Look what we finally caught." And I mean, it was this black mass hanging out in the hallway. And they're like, "Click on the YouTube link to see the full video." And I was like so excited because I was like, "Oh yeah, this is a really good ghost." And um, it was an edited image, and the
Yeah.
YouTube link was to Rick Astley.
Oh man,
Winchester House rickrolled everybody.
that sucks.
I was like, oh my god, I'm so excited. I was like, and then all of a sudden, I click on the link and doo 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 doo, and I'm like, oh, you've got to be kidding me.
Man, because if you ever find yourself like in front of the Winchester house, it will not disappoint.
Mm,
Even if there's not a single ghost in there, just they kept building the house to keep the spirits confused. So it's the weirdest sort of house. It's the basis for every mad castle ever out there, you know?
I mean, pretty much.
Pretty
But
much.
yeah, Debbie got to tour it here a few years ago, and I guess it was just like the energy there was just super intense.
Yeah, it would have to be, especially if you're somebody in tune with those kinds of energies, that
Hmm.
has to be just That has to be weird, you know?
Yeah.
Shit. I made hummus yesterday.
Ooh, you made
Check it
hummus.
out. I got 6 pounds of fucking garbanzo beans, boiled them, softened them, and just I went through batch after batch until it came out right.
That's yeah.
Yeah.
But at least you probably got it figured out now.
That's the thing. And that's what I wanted to impress upon people with that story was that I failed and failed and failed again. But then I was like, I reached fuck it. And I was like, I'm gonna eyeball the ingredients. I'm gonna use what my mother-in-law called love as an ingredient. So I turned on Joy Odalocum and I just made it. And I
Mm.
opened it. I opened the food processor and I was like, this is perfect. It tastes just like the hummus that I get at the store, only it tastes kind of like pesto because I put pesto in it.
Ooh,
Right?
that's exciting.
Yeah. So I don't know. We have this thing going on, oat milk and
Hmm.
hummus. Because the chickpea, the garbanzo bean, it's
Hmm.
in the top two of water soluble fibers, right
Oh.
behind barley. So I can't wait to start working with barley. And that's because you were talking about barley one episode. And I was like, I gotta learn more
Hmm.
about barley. See the shit you do to me?
What can I say? Barley's an interesting one. I mean, it doesn't just go in beer.
Right. And we had some responses. We're just waiting for Dan. We did have some responses concerning our last Sunday episode about suicide, and a
Hmm.
lot of a lot of it was advice saying that music really helped people
Mm.
that were isolated and alone and feeling those feelings and didn't know what to do with them, said they turned to music And
Mm-hmm.
that reminded me, that's what I did in my depression during a bad time in my life. I started just yelling into a microphone, you know what I mean? And then it just turned into music. And so I just wanted to offer that advice to people, that
Mm-hmm.
before you consider suicide, maybe consider a career in music, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, it's a tool for definitely processing. I mean, that's what I did. I used music a lot, like
Yeah,
between listening and writing and playing. I used music very heavily when
right.
I was struggling. So
That's cool.
absolutely something to do for sure.
Yeah. A lot of people listen to this. Like, I we've gotten a few this week alone, people telling us that they've made major changes in their lives based on just some of our opinions, like
Hmm,
left bad situations, you know. I don't want to name any
good,
names right now. Somebody's
good,
staying anonymous. And I
perfect.
like I like the radical change, but I want to impress upon people that they should take the baby steps to get there too, to ensure that it goes well. A lot of people cold turkey shit and then come back to what they know because it's a habit. So sometimes creating a habit leading up to a change is just as important as the change itself. But if you're in a shitty situation, get the fuck out of it.
I mean, yeah, like
Yeah,
that's one of those things. If it's bad, you just gotta fucking book it.
I
Like
agree.
figure out your exit and make it happen. And there's everybody's got the way that they'll figure that out and their tolerance. And you know the
Oh,
best the thing that you got to do is you got to be safe about it. You got to figure out
hmm,
what's going to be the safest option for you.
agreed. Hi, Kai. She wants to know who the host of the Loner podcast is. It's Alicia. I'll send you a link to it because I'm having a hard time finding the podcast itself. It's on Spotify. That's where I got it, but I'll send you the link for it. So,
Fantastic.
yeah. And so, what's been going on in your days?
Oh, let's see. I mean, mostly work. I'm
Yeah.
always busy with work. Like
Okay.
it's just kind of one of those things. But I did get to meet someone new, and we've been chatting, got to hang out and see each other last night. It was a lot of fun.
I
So
like that. I
yeah,
love conversation. You know what I mean?
yeah.
We forget about it. Like, I get that question all the time. What are we going to talk about? And I never have that question. I just always dive in. You know what I mean?
And that's one of those things. Like it's great to like dive into some of stuff. Especially like with the kind of life that I lead.
Hmm.
It's always kind of like this new and exciting frontier to just kind of find out where relationships with people go. So
Yeah. No, I
yeah.
totally agree with that. I love that. I'm just
So
I'm introverted. And that's the
mhm.
weird thing with me, is that I'm introverted. So for me, it's like I can waste an hour being all anxious about this conversation, or just dive in, get it over with, and then be like, "Ah, all right, I don't know what happened, you know."
That's fair.
So,
That's
but
absolutely fair.
everybody reacts the way they react to conversation. I didn't want to piss anybody off like that.
Right.
Yeah, I
Right.
don't know. The weather's really good. I don't know. I don't know where the conversation with Dan is going to go. So I really don't want to like start any major like discussions. But here's something that I wanted to ask you, but
Ooh.
I don't know how to do it. I don't know.
Just do it. Just do it. Just
All
ask
right.
it.
So, do you think that being an academic gives you an advantage in being empathetic overall?
No, actually, I don't think it does.
Okay.
Um, the reason I say that
Yeah. See,
is
Judy.
the reason I say that is that it's highly dependent on what you do and what you study.
Right.
So, for example, I can. Here we go. Here's a couple of great reasons why, like one way, one in the other. So, for
Mhm.
example, like looking at uh, when you look at like the issues around whether or not people of color are disproportionately affected by law enforcement. I mean, when you look at the population and you look at the DOJ's own data, compared to the population of the United States itself, the makeup of in which who is actually going to be who you would think should be in jail if you were to go based on like percentages, you should
Right.
have more white people in jail. But the reality is that you have more black people in jail. And when you look at who is affected by it disproportionately, it's younger black men who are more likely to be jailed than anybody else. So, in that realm, you can be empathetic to a cause and be like, yeah, something's wrong here. Now, on the other side of things, the empathy for people, I would say this is a great example of a recent one is, data surrounding people dying from COVID and what non-vaccination versus post-vaccination versus post-booster or post-infection looks like, and long hauler syndrome, what that looks like without vaccination, with vaccination, with booster. And you can look at all of that, and even though you have empathy for people and you don't want to see them suffer, in the academic realm, when you see that the data clearly says, hey, all of these things help reduce the possibility of long COVID, and all of these things help reduce the possibility of death, and people don't choose that route, it's very easy academically to go, well, it sucks to be dumb, and it sucks to be misinformed, it sucks to be, and that's what makes it really tough. So I would say
Mhm.
that I would make the argument that, being an academic, depending on what your field of study is, might lead you to be more empathetic.
Okay.
My field, I would say no. My field leads more towards understanding data
Yeah.
and
Pulling the
understanding,
emotion out of it.
right, and really just looking at what you're doing, what the results are.
Okay.
So I would say that, if you were an academic in social sciences, absolutely it would make you a more empathetic person.
Okay.
But perhaps somebody who is, like in my realm, that might not necessarily be the case.
We had there was a comment on Twitter that asked the question, how can Lauren Boebert be a representative when she doesn't have a high school diploma? And my answer was because a barrier of education alone shouldn't be a determining factor. Is she a human garbage bag? Yes. Is she a human garbage bag because she isn't educated? No. And Judy came back at me with like, if she was educated, she'd be more empathetic. And I think there's people that learn from experience and
Hmm.
they have a certain wisdom. I think I'm that person, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And then there's academics who tend to leave empathy at a door to collect the data. You can't go into the data and go, I have an empathy towards Muslim people alone. And you want to skew the
Hmm.
data and look for it
Right.
that way. You have to leave that at the door. But at some point, you have to come back and put your empathy into action, your education into action, as
Hmm.
well as somebody like me that's learned years of experience. I should put that into educating myself specifically in the ways that I've learned through wisdom that I use. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So I think it's a combination of the two of us that makes us different. You know what I
Well,
mean?
and that's the thing about, I would say that when it comes to like data collection, for example, like oftentimes the the sample that you think you are going to collect on versus the
Hmm.
sample that you get results from
Right.
heavily skews your information, and or sometimes the questions that you ask are, for one group of people are just fine and normal, but for another group of people they're, callous or offensive or any other number of things. And so there is always there can always be some empathy in how you go about trying to get the data, but the
Hmm.
data itself is without empathy. It's
I
like,
mean,
this is
you
what it is.
you're wanting the data is the empathy part, but I think
Mhm.
what the data you collect, if you give it to the right people, that tells us who to be empathetic to in the situation that we're looking at. like like we always talk about
Mhm.
homelessness, and I say, yeah, there's out of 21,000 homeless people in Washington state, 5,000 of them are chronic. So
Mhm.
your data would tell us the largest subset to work on first until we
Mhm.
can dwindle it down to the chronic people and then help them. So that's what the data
Mhm.
does, instead of just being advocates on the ground, opening a store and helping as many people as walk in, but they don't know where you are. You know what I mean?
Exactly, and I would argue that it's the people with the greatest empathy that are going to take that data and they're going to do the most good with it. Very empathetic,
Right.
like, and I would say academically so.
Right. And then
Um,
it just boils down to the communication, which Dan is really a fan of,
oh yeah,
how to communicate what you all know to the people that can spread that better. You know what I mean?
right, and that's, I think, one of the things that people don't tend to think about a whole lot is just how much really goes into like trying to do a study and
Yeah.
trying to, because I would make the argument that, you know, with an empathy towards a specific response, that's how you end up getting bias in your data, because
Hmm.
you're looking for confirmation bias.
Right.
Whereas, when you just synthesize the question without emotion and collect the data without emotion,
Hmm.
I would also argue that in a lot of ways that sometimes leads to, your data, what you collect, being fairly emotionless, and that can be good or bad. It just kind of depends on what you're trying to do. Like for example, if you're looking for a series of yes no answers, obviously you're not looking for a whole lot of emotion, but like, one of the research methods is getting open-ended questions and get people talking, find out what keywords people are using,
That's right. That's
and
right.
having cold questions don't lead towards getting large fulfilling answers that
Right.
you can then go in and analyze, and the way that people analyze, like open-ended questions, the way that they tag certain words and the way that they use certain taxonomies in order to sort out what the emotion is, what the feeling is. It's so cool to see,
Right.
but it's a lot of work, and it is absolutely something where it's like you have to be very careful about what it is you're trying to get, because even then you don't want to skew, you don't want to have the question intentionally skew towards a specific answer.
Oh my
Like if
God,
you get,
that's my life, is
oh, seriously,
trying to figure out the question so somebody won't react and give me the answer they think I want. You know what I
exactly.
mean? Or
And that's,
expect something from my question. You know what I mean?
or give whatever the copy paste political answer is. Like,
Right.
I need you to actually use your brain and tell me what it is you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're going into.
That's right.
And so it's definitely very tough in that, you can end up, like, you can just end up with a bunch of biased junk, and that's just not useful. But you
That's
could also
right.
end up with a lot of stuff that help you better refine the question later, and then be like, well, in terms of data gathering, this was a bust, but I think I know how to refine the question.
Yeah. I think if a pollster calls me and says, "What's your number one concern with America?" I'm going to have an answer. But if we have a long form conversation with Jeffrey and I for an hour, you're going to find out that maybe that answer isn't the accurate answer.
Hmm.
And what I keep saying on Twitter is that we need to know what people are dealing with so that we know what to talk about. Otherwise, we're just throwing darts at stories on Twitter. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? If people would tell us what the issues are, then maybe we could get somebody on here to talk about them. We have Jeffrey and Dan coming up, and they have more degrees than a thermometer. You know what I mean? And so if people aren't, if they're not asking us to ask them the questions, I don't know what to do with them. It's like having
Right.
empty semis going back and forth across the country. I got these great brains together and we're looking to get more. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So, and that's what we need to do. And I need to know what people want to talk about. So, but
Hmm.
I know people are tired of the political perspective, the political language. You know
Oh,
what I mean?
absolutely. Absolutely. And you just, you look at the way that people are interacting with news stories, the way that, the media keeps control C, control V on
Yeah.
whatever, line has to be said, or whatever politician tries to get in a few buzzwords so that way they can get their, Twitter mentions on a YouTube clip of so and so
Right.
owns the blank. And it's like, oh God, is this all it is? This is idiocracy entirely, and it doesn't lead to any sort of solution finding. It's
No,
just back and forth online dick measuring,
pretty much. Pretty
and
much. And
it's
I
it's
want to
so
get
annoying.
under that. I want to get under that. I want to get
You want to
beyond
get
that.
under that?
I
You
want
want
to
to get
get
under
under
that
that.
dick?
I want to get under under that conversation. You know what I mean? I think if the people start talking about shit that matters, then the conversation up there will change. And I've seen that happen
Oh,
in
absolutely.
a number of ways that I just can't explain it, that we've touched on things that grow
Hmm.
into things. You know
Well,
what I
and
mean?
and part of the something that you kind of touched on, people are emotional creatures, and like, for example, when you ask a question like what's your number one issue with America right now, we're influenced by that emotion. You could have had a run-in with someone that day, um
Exactly.
and that would influence your answer. So much like you said, in a long form conversation, you might come to find out that the answer that you got, what's your number one issue in America, you know and you get X answer, and you sit down and you have a conversation with someone. So tell me what your number one issues are in America.
Right.
And people will start talking about, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and then you can start to see where people spend the most amount of time
Mm-hmm.
talking about specific issues. So they might say, oh, homelessness is my issue. But then when you get them in long form conversation, it might be, the fact that affordable housing is really the issue that they have, because
Right.
they might be struggling. And it's not necessarily that they ran into somebody who was homeless, but that they themselves are afraid that they're one missed paycheck away from ending up on the street. And
There's a saying, we're all 5 steps away from dead,
yeah,
or
so,
5 mistakes from, you know, death.
or one big one.
Right. But yeah,
like
I get
like
what
my
you're
like
saying.
a friend of mine who was EOD, and for the army. And I'm like, dude, how in the hell do you deal with the fact that you could just get blown up? He goes, well, either I'm going to save the day or it ain't going to be my problem much longer.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I'm like, Jesus.
My nephew is in Afghanistan. He's the kid that used to unpile the rocks off the improvised explosives in the road, you know? And yeah, that kid
Oh
came back
fuck.
hard in the yard, you know?
Right.
So the thing is what you're saying is we're emotional and we attack the problem that we're feeling, that we're told. But in a long form conversation, what you might find out is that a solution to your issue might be a solution to a multiple range of issues affecting you.
Hmm.
Instead of looking at the spark, I see it as like a campfire and then a spark, and we're all like, oh my god, there's a spark, when we should be putting the big fire out. So like a living wage, that takes care of a lot of inequality, right? So I
Hmm.
always see that. A better education for our
Hmm.
kids means that America will get better because they'll know to expect more. That's what
Hmm.
I think of. And I think that gets rid of homelessness just in a more long-term way, you know?
Hmm. Or somebody might complain about um you know whether or not a certain group of people is taking their job opportunities. And you have to dig in. Is there probably something racist there? Maybe. There
Maybe.
might be a pretty good chance of that. Or if you have a long form conversation, perhaps they're working in a dying industry that they feel absolutely sunk into, and that they have like this sunk cost of, I've got to stay in this industry. This is all I know. This has been my life for 20
Mhm.
plus years, and I don't have any sort of ability to change careers or find something similar in my area, or be able to do any number of things. And we come to find out that the problems are often more nuanced than we want to think that they are, because we tend to have knee-jerk reactions to certain subjects. And
Right.
sometimes, yeah, you're in the right. It's very clear what's happening. But sometimes there's more nuance to it than we want to admit. And that's where setting up your questions to be able to get long form answers really helps you dive in, because you will find, I'm sure you will find elements of, something that is going to absolutely disgust and gross you out. But the more you dig in, the more that you start to find that there are other issues at hand that, you might be able to address instead. So like for the person who is concerned about their industry dying out, what if they had the ability to go and train into a similar industry, so that way they're taking 75% of the skills that they already have and know and use, but you're adding a new set of tools to the toolbox, and suddenly they can be in a new industry, perhaps making more money than they are currently.
Yeah. Hello,
and
Ohio, right?
and you're able to,
Microprocessors, microchips, they're going to be
right,
making those. Yeah.
right. And that's the thing is like there are so many different possibilities out there, but without sitting down and, not looking for the answer that you want. Because I
Mm.
mean, I guarantee if you're looking to find out, is it just racist people who don't, want change, you'll find that answer. I mean, there's no question about it. You go looking for something very specific, you're going to get confirmation bias. But if
Yeah.
you're trying to figure out a larger question, a larger answer to a fairly complex question, you have, I mean, you have to have the quantitative and you have to have the qualitative, and you
Right.
have to be able to cross reference those two. And through that, you start to get better answers and better information.
Mm.
And that's where, unfortunately, sometimes what you end up finding out is, yeah, sometimes the data is just gross and you're like, well, shit, there's nothing I can do with this because it's
Yeah.
unfortunately what I was afraid of. And sometimes you get different answers, you get more robust answers, and things that you can actually work with. And so that's where it's, in my field of study, that's where it gets really difficult to be able to, sit down and actually have that, you know
Yeah.
go figure out what the question and the answer are, because one can royally screw up the other.
Right. Yeah, that's the problem. If you don't include everything, something is going to throw you off. I think when I think about it, I think about a barbecue table with a various degrees and colors of the same age group. Like if you put 10, 50-year-old people at a table together, they're going to have the exact same issues despite color or gender. I think if you put I think if you put 10, 20-year-olds at a table, they are going to have similar complaints. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like, I don't think what I think it is that somebody's telling us we need to fight amongst ourselves to get ahead before
Hmm.
everybody else does. When the
Hmm.
truth is if we all work together, we would get higher. You know what I mean? And
Right.
so I think a racist is just somebody that wants theirs first. And then they're happy if somebody else gets less than them later. You know what I mean?
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I would
The
definitely say,
majority of racists. There's some that just hate the color of somebody, you know what I mean? But I think most passive, like the immigration thing, I don't think it has anything to do with brown people pouring into the country as much as it is. I've been told that they're going to get something because they work harder, and I'm going to get less because I don't want to work as hard. You know what I mean? And so,
or or the feeling that they're just going to be given something that's not given to me.
right, right, right.
and
So let's
and
drag them down instead of trying to be better.
and that's the, and then you have the, and that's where, you start with, when you find out what that information is, it's okay, so what is it that they can get that
Right,
is going to make sense? What is it that they can get that is not necessarily going to lean towards this idea of unfairness, but that, there is a process, there is something that they have to go through, and that,
right,
realistically, there are just some things that they're not going to be able to fulfill. For
right.
example, um, you know, my cohort in master school was predominantly Indian and Chinese. And, did I, was I like, wow, there's a bunch of Indian and Chinese people here and, blah, blah, blah. No. I mean, population wise, think about it. You have two countries that combined have over 2 billion people.
Mhm.
I mean, realistically, there's a good chance that a significant part of, what is a world-class program is going to have a lot of different ethnicities in it.
I would hope so.
But they
I
had to
would hope
compete.
so.
They had to compete on the same level that I did
Hmm.
in order to get into the program.
Right.
So, the idea that somebody is given something I'm not is, that's not a thing, because we all had to compete in the exact same way.
Right.
And that competition was very difficult,
And
you know.
on the other end of the spectrum, if you're on a road crew like Adam, if you're in a warehouse like I used to be, on the front line of that is multiracial. You know what I mean? Like in those warehouses, in those road crews, um, stocking at Walmart, it's all multi-diverse, and
Absolutely.
it's people having opinions. I know somebody that says I don't like black people because my historical interactions with them have been bad. So when I walk around with him and we have a good interaction with another race, I say, "Are you going to put that on the list?" You know what I mean? Like
Well, I
you
mean, and
just
that's the
helped
thing
that
is,
lady's baby and she thanked you. Is that a good thing now? Are you going to suddenly feel better about that race,
well, I mean, like, by that metric, Debbie and I, would, if it was, oh, my interactions with that race, have
Uh-huh.
historically been bad, Debbie and I wouldn't like white people at all.
That's what I'm saying about it. I've been screwed
Because
over by
that's
more white people than any other race.
exactly. But then it's like, now let's look at the bias behind that. Where
Yeah,
I grew up was like 99% white.
that's
so
right.
so and that's where it's like, okay, that whole line is bullshit, and you have to call that bullshit,
Right.
because depending on where you're at, you know your interactions are going to be different. For example, like when I was in Phoenix, like, my neighbors were just amazing. Large Mexican family. I had a lot of fun.
Right.
And it, you know so does that mean that because I had this great interaction that it's all good? No. Just like a great interaction with a white person doesn't mean all of it's good. It's, you
Right.
have to treat the individual as the individual in these cases. And
Yeah.
you're going to find out that, assholes are universal. It doesn't matter where you're at. We all know people who are assholes across the entire spectrum. And it's like,
Hmm.
well, I'm not going to deal with them anymore, because that's what they're doing isn't cool.
But maybe if you leave different races out of the American experience and only give them part of it, 10, 20, 30%, they're not going to be qualified for the other 80% because they're living their life fully in that 20%. And you're living in the 100%. So if you have an interaction to sell or buy a phone, then yeah, there's going to be a cultural difference there because they're surviving under the radar, whereas you get the benefits of doing this interaction legitimately. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So people have to think about that. I have a lot of friends that choose to live under the radar so that
Hmm.
law doesn't pick them up because it's dumbass laws, drug
Right.
dealers, sex professionals. I have friends that do all that stuff, and if you were to meet them, their life would seem totally foreign to you because they live with a different set of rules, but they're
Hmm.
still awesome people. They're survivors.
Right. And then you have the greater question of, whatever they're doing, why is it that they can't do what they're doing in the light,
Mhm.
versus, what laws have been put on the books to make it so that way they can't do what they do.
Right.
And you have to look at the historical fact. Like, there's a great history on, how Seattle was essentially built on sex workers.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's absolutely amazing. And then you start to see all of these laws creep in, because all of these seamstresses were making more money than the businessmen.
Right.
And that just couldn't happen. And it's bullshit, you
But then
know
let's go back to that point and ask why it couldn't happen. Why they were afraid that women would have more success and power in the end than them in a certain area at a certain time, you know?
and that's the thing, is it's like,
Uh-oh.
it's
Did we just start like um gender, how do you call it? Critical gender theory?
oh
C
Christ.
CGT?
Ow, that just made my head hurt. Oh God.
Nice. Another burnt
Yeah.
toast moment from
Oh
Public
God, I'm
Access
having a
America.
stroke. I'm having a stroke. It hurts. No.
Sorry.
Oh, speaking of that, so Devi found radical monogamy.
And that is Devi's career, by the way.
No, Devi's career is
You know.
not radical monogamy.
No, it's gender
Yeah, yeah.
education. Yeah, 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 yeah.
But it was hilarious because there was this post about there's apparently this deep sea fish that the way that they mate is essentially they meld together permanently.
Nice. Wow.
And so Debbie was showing me this, and it's like, what the fuck? It's like, yeah, apparently when you find somebody in the deep, you just completely meld into them. And I'm like, I just look over and I go, is this radical monogamy? And I
Yeah.
thought Debbie was gonna fucking choke.
I just want a marriage license that allows me to renew it every day, every morning. Do I want to renew this? You know what I mean?
Oh God, I'd end up forgetting. And
Me
then somebody
too.
be like, ugh.
Yeah.
Like I know me. It'll be the one time that I'm like, still like half asleep and I'm not paying attention and I'm like trying to run out the door, get the kids out, and oh hey, you forgot to renew that.
That's fine. This bomb will
Uh,
explode in 1 hour. Yeah, all right. I'm okay with you.
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't
Let me
know.
get my coffee on desk first. Meanwhile, it's like, the bomb takes an hour and 20 minutes to defuse, and I'm waking up late, going, "Fuck."
I don't know. In a marriage, I saw no difference in the end between um I don't know, some religious connection and just being there for a friend. In the end,
Yeah,
it was just being there for a friend until there was no friend left to be there for. So
right.
I don't know. I just don't see marriage the way other people see it. But neither do you, and neither
Yeah,
does Devi, and neither
yeah.
does anybody else. You know what I mean? And that's the great thing. I just,
Hmm.
I'm one of the questions I had from last episode that I put as promotion was who's defining marriage? You know what I mean? And why do they get to? That really
Hmm.
irritates me. I think it's my choice, my life, my marriage.
Well, and I've had this conversation in the past. It's like, if you have a Christian religion that says only a man and a woman shall be married, but you also have a Christian religion that says, no, cool, we'll marry and any two consenting adults or any two adults with the ability to consent
Hmm.
or whatever. Like who's in the right there? Like when you look at the way the law is written in this country, anyways, a lot of people view religion or view marriage as a religious uh, act. So if one church says yes and another church says no, who is the government to dictate which one's correct?
Wow. Like down here on Tinder, it's this is what I'm lacking. This is what you have to fill what I'm lacking. So it's convenient for us to be together because together we're one complete person. We can do what one normal person does, but we're both fallible in
Right,
these ways. It's not
right.
love. It's not this soul connection with people it's a commitment. If you commit to somebody so hard that you're just theirs, you're going to have that connection and it's
Hmm.
going to turn into jealous stalking. You know what I mean? That's what that turns into because people go on their ways. I think a relationship needs to reach the point of boredom. That means you're perfect at it and you can now fulfill yourself and become a better, bigger, fuller person. Like I'm not using Jeffrey to fulfill my life. I'm a complete person and Jeffrey's this add-on to it. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Absolutely. So that whole you've got to be happy with yourself before you're happy with somebody else.
Right.
You
I've
know,
had
eh,
so many relationships where somebody says, "Are you happy?" And I'm like, "No, you? No. All right. Bye." That's how it
like, is
ends.
this working for you? No. What about
Yeah,
you? No. All right.
right.
Well, but then you also get, I've had those relationships too where it's like I swear it's like a grudge match. It's like one of us is going to try
Right.
and make the other quit first, and it's like that's
Hmm.
not good. That's not healthy, and that's kids being fucking stupid. And
Yeah, that was my teen and 20s, but
yeah,
eventually I just realized it was so much easier just to go by than it was to go, all right, I'm gonna
right.
make her hate me, you know?
Right. It's so much easier to have the open conversation. Hey, is this still working for you? Is there
Yeah.
something I can do to help? Is there something I can do to help make this, work better? What can I change? And then,
Mhm.
have that conversation about your own needs. And like, the moment you stop talking is the moment that stuff starts to slide. And,
Mhm.
I'm not going to sit here and claim that, I'm a master at it, because Debbie will laugh me out of the house. And I mean, it's just, sometimes I'm better at it than other times. Sometimes I'm more attentive at it than other times.
Mhm.
And I get it wrong a lot of times, and that's
That
just,
goes back to what you were just saying earlier in the conversation, to where we're emotional people affected by the day's events, the month's events, the year's events, and
Mhm,
the triggers from our past. You know what I mean? Like
absolutely.
if I'm on a date and the girl drinks 2 drinks, I'm like, I hate you because I don't like alcoholics. And she might not even be an alcoholic. I'm just like, I don't like you, you know?
Right. you know so
Mm,
it's just, people have emotional responses to different things, and number one, it's our duty to figure out what our emotional issues are and not push them on others.
that's right.
And I say that as somebody who, it's easier said than done a lot of times. And number two, you have to do the work, and sometimes you suck at doing the work, and sometimes, you let life get in the way for a while, and then you sit there and go, yeah, no, I'll definitely get back to this, and then you don't get back to it.
Right.
And you have to get back to it, and it's like, I had to take a break from therapy for a little bit because my schedule went fucking wonky.
Mm,
um
I'm
and
sorry about that.
and unfortunately, it started to show that I really needed to be back in therapy.
Yeah.
But I've got, my appointments scheduled, and it's time to get back to some self-care, and start digging in on a lot of these, a lot more issues that I have to dig in on. That's
Yeah.
just it.
I just realized, like, with telehealth, I can actually get like mental health,
Hmm.
over on my devices. So
That's
why
what I do.
wouldn't I just check in with somebody once a week, you know? Not that I have anything major, but I do think I'm like a little left of humans. I think I'm a little different than a lot of people, and I'd like somebody to rationalize that for me, you know?
Whether it's, whether it's once a week, I
Mhm.
mean, when I started going back to therapy, it was once a week, and then it was once every 2 weeks. And then, where we were at once every 3 weeks, but sometimes I'd have to cancel and push it back a week just because the
Yeah.
schedule was weird. But now it's like I'm going to be scheduling like actual time off, so that way I can actually sit down and do the work that I need to do.
Mm.
And
But it'll
have
go
time
it'll
afterwards, that where I'm not like, okay, I got my ass kicked, now I need to go back to work. It's, I'm going to get my ass kicked, and then I'm going to sit down and, actually
get back to
try
it.
and actually dig into, what I'm thinking and feeling.
Right. You can't complain about life unless you're doing things to proactively change yourself, you know? I always say if you want to change the world, start with yourself, make yourself better, you know?
Right. And that's the other thing too, is like, like I've noticed some changes in myself too, and it's like,
Mm,
okay, well, start let's start getting some stuff figured out, because I can't be unhappy about all these different things, and try to rationalize it as, oh, it's this thing, oh, it's this thing, oh, it's this thing. And when you start looking at the list, it's like, oh shit, it's me.
right. It's my
and
problem with all this stuff.
yeah, and so then it's just, because it's like I've been trying to figure that out with some of my own shit. It's like, it's like, I've been feeling this way, I've been feeling this way, I've been feeling this way, and it's this thing, and it's this thing, and it's this thing. It's like, no,
Yeah.
I've been feeling. So the question, I've had to dig into is, is my medicine still working effectively? Do I
Mm.
need to be doing some things different in order to
Is
make
your
sure?
nutrition and exercise routine affecting your medications?
Lack of exercise
Uh-huh.
routine. I mean, like, once we're done with the podcast today, I'm moving some stuff around in the living room, and I'm bringing our elliptical into the house,
Nice.
because I've got to stop being lazy about it, and I need to start, spending some actual time, on this thing, and getting my heart in better shape, because
Me
like
too.
I've noticed, like, especially being on medication, like, there's some things that I've noticed, and I'm like, I've got to get better with this. And
Mm.
you know, I'm lucky to have somebody like Debbie who cares about, my health as well and says, hey, dude, what the fuck? It's like,
Yeah.
I'm worried about you. Stop fucking around with this.
Oh,
It's like, God
but
damn it, you're right. I need to not fuck around with this.
I noticed a lot when it comes to medication that my diet drastically affects it to where like thick carbs will actually suck in the medication so I get less of it. But then when they're going through my body, it disperses it differently. You know what
Mm-hmm.
I mean? It's like when I added, it sounds stupid, when I added fiber to my diet, my medications began working better. When I added more water to my diet, they started working correctly. You know what I mean?
Well, and that doesn't surprise me. And then you've got other factors, like for example, medication is based on a specific weight range is where
Uh-huh.
they
Yeah,
figure out
yeah,
that
yeah.
it's most effective. So like for example, if the medication was really effective, 50 pounds ago for me, and it's not effective now, you know, there's a number of things that you can look at. Is it the weight? Is it
Hmm.
is it my metabolism? Is it? And you have to go through the line. But there's a lot of things that you can do and change
Yeah.
to help find out if it's really, the medication or if it's just the fact that your
Hmm.
body is doing what it's doing because, you not taking care of it properly.
Yep.
Hi, me. Um, so it's like that was one of those things like I never thought about was the fact that the way that medication is dosed is based on specific weights. And I was like, oh
Right.
shit. Of course that would
Hmm.
make sense.
It's all of that stuff. I think it's just fascinating that we don't put more thought into the stuff we do for
Hmm.
ourselves, you know? Like, so we were talking about relationships, and I honestly think that my philosophy is if you think about me, I'll think about you in a relationship. But if you
Hmm.
start thinking about you, then I have to think about me because nobody else is. And to get back to a relationship that works, you have to selflessly begin thinking about somebody and create a routine that shows them that you are so they can trust thinking about you again because you're not doing it just to get them to, you know what I mean? So
Hmm.
that's how to fix a relationship. And I think I lost my trail after that. I just think it's exciting. I think we should think more about ourselves. We should have more self care. Oh, here it was. You were talking about the elliptical. And I think you just, like I was saying, don't make these cold turkey maneuvers, but get on the elliptical for a minute. And it's going to seem so stupid, but never do less. You know what I mean? Because then the next day you're going to be like, all right, I'm going to do 2 minutes. But then the next day you're going to be like, oh, I got three. And then eventually you're going to be like, wow, I got to do 20 minutes, but I can. You know what I mean? Instead of I'm going to try 20 minutes till I burn myself out and hate this and never do it again, you know?
Right. And that's one of the things like, what I'm going to be, start out with is like, realistically, it's like I need to get on there for 10 minutes. I need to get my heart going. And it's not going to be like I'm going to jump on this thing and start fucking sprinting.
Right. Your
It's going
ankles
to
got to get used to it. Your knees got to get used
your
to it, you
legs got
know?
to get your leg muscles got to get used to it.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it's like, even with my heart, it's like my heart's got to get used to it. It's like I can't just jump on there and push it as hard as I can. I'll end up
Right.
falling off the fucking thing. And it's
Yeah.
like anything else, you're building your muscles back. And so it's going to take a little bit of time in order for you
Hmm.
to get back in that routine. I'm going to get off that elliptical and my legs are going to be like, I'm going to look like I'm Elvis for a second, just got that whole
Right.
lot of shaking going on.
But then you're going to be sore and you're going to have to wait, you know? Like
Right.
I felt so stupid doing one push up, but then I was so irritated when I had to do 20. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I told
You
my
know,
friend, I was like, take one step out the door and never do less. He's walking 10 miles a day now. You know what I mean?
that's awesome.
He's lost 63 pounds. He's in a different shirt size. He's feeling better about himself. He's got, I mean, he's more positive. And it's just,
Hmm.
and he started with just a step, you know?
Right. And like for me, like, what I want to do is I want to start trying to get my heart in shape. A
Hmm.
friend of ours is actually, he's just opened up his own gym. And my goal is to get my heart feeling good enough in a better place to where I can go sign up at his gym and actually start
Right.
lifting again because I loved lifting.
Me
and
too.
it's where I feel better. But my heart being what it is right now, it's like, it's kind of one of those things where it's like I need to have some motivation. Like
Mm.
it's kind of like that whole, like the way that I establish routines is probably a little weird and foreign. So like I'll change one thing and
Right.
I will work through that change until it's just normal. And then I'll change another thing and I'll just keep with that until that feels normal. And then I'll change another thing and I'll keep with that until that feels normal.
Right.
And that's how I make changes that stick. So like for example, I've had sugar and creamer in my coffee every day since I was probably fucking 13, 14 years old. And about 2 months ago, I was just like, I got to quit putting all this fucking sugar in my stuff. This isn't good for me.
Right.
And so I'm like, all right, well, we're going to start by having the amount of, creamer and sugar I put in. And so I did that. And then I started getting rid of the sugar part of it. And I did that. And then finally, but then I replaced all of that sugar with creamer. So I was like, well, shit, that didn't work the way that I wanted it to.
Right.
So I'm like, nope, we're just going to cut the creamer out altogether and you're just going to drink black coffee.
Ugh.
I actually like it.
If I got quality coffee, yeah, there's some quality coffees I could
Oh,
drink black,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
not Folgers, not
Oh,
Maxwell
Jesus
House.
Christ. Yeah, no, drinking just plain old ass black Folgers. Oh
Right.
God,
And see me,
no.
I went out and I bought organic oat milk creamer.
Mhm,
I was like, I'm just switching. But then it was like it's separated and you can't
mhm,
get the right amount. You know what I mean? So it was like I was irritated with it, with the
mhm,
product, not the quality.
right.
So I used to bite my fingernails since I was like
Mhm.
8. And I just one day decided, don't bite this fingernail, you know? And then when I stopped biting that one, I was like, just stop biting that one and that one. And then it was a whole hand. And then like 5 years later, I don't bite my nails anymore.
Yeah, Debbie stopped biting their nails. And like I don't know like how they catalyzed that change. Like if it was
Hmm.
like you said where you're like, don't bite that fingernail.
Right.
But their nails look great now,
Isn't that
you
cool?
know?
Yeah, I took pride. Dude, I started like putting nail polish on my nails. I was like, these
Hell
things
yeah.
look good and I don't want to ruin them. So I put clear polish on them because when I would go to pick at it, I'd be like, nope, you know, or I
Right.
put black polish on and I was like, I don't want to mess the black up. You know what I mean?
And
Because
like yeah.
for a blind guy to use nail polish is incredibly difficult.
Just got to dip the whole finger in.
Yeah, and then just clean the finger once it all dries, right?
There you go.
So a woman that would like just do my nails for me, I'd be so happy. But yeah, I just because I never knew what to do with my nails. I asked somebody on another podcast, Brittany, I was like, how is a man supposed to file his nails? What are they supposed to look like? Because I don't know. I'm blind. I can't see people's nails, so I can't judge what
You
mine
never
should look
and you
like.
never did it before.
Right. And my dad was never, or my mom never taught me, hey, your nails look like this. Here's how you do it, you know? And that's why we do just the tip, is because I want some of those just stupid basic things so that a kid growing up goes, oh, shave down. Otherwise, I'm going to look like an idiot. You know, I don't know
Yeah.
because I never did. So I don't know what it would look like if you just started by shaving down. And obviously, you don't either. But what
No.
would your beard look like if you shaved up your whole pubescent career, you know?
Oh God. All I know is that my face does not like shaving at all. It's unfortunate. It never has.
Mm,
So growing a beard out was one of the better things that happened because then my face stopped having significant issues.
wow.
Yeah, it didn't matter what razor I used, whether I did, like the bare bone stuff that, didn't
Yeah.
have, that was chemical free and all this other, it never mattered what I did. I mean, even with Debbie would do straight razor shaves and Debbie uses all the best stuff and my skin just
Right.
fucking hates it.
Mm,
And
I
so
get it.
like I just, for me it's just got to be close. I can't do actual shaves, and well, that sucks.
That's cool.
But
Well,
Debbie's like,
how do you
fucking
handle?
great. I don't have to straight razor it. Also, I also apparently look like a creeper if I don't have a beard, and
No, that's
so
wrong. That's wrong because I did stalk you on Instagram to find out if that was you. And yeah, I saw a picture of you with no beard. Yeah, you're pretty fucking hot. Yeah, that's
I
cool.
think
I
I
mean, I
definitely think I
understand
look
it
like a creeper.
because no beard and blisters and pockmarks and redness, that's what I get on my neck when I shave, that doesn't look attractive either, so that's fine.
I
But
mean,
how do you handle your beard so that it doesn't constantly itch? I mean, what's some hey Jeffrey, just the
mhm.
tip. Give me just the tip. Give me some beard tips because they go
Oh,
everywhere. I don't know how to maintain it and keep
oh,
it
Debbie is gonna
oiled and it
laugh.
itches. So
Um,
tell me some things you do to
number
survive the
one,
beard.
number one, wash your fucking beard. Um, you gotta use good soap and water. You gotta use beard wash.
Beard wash.
Debbie's like, oh, you fucking use soap on your beard.
You notice how I'm throwing little hooks in to get them to be here more, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Jeffrey, why don't you give me the hairstyling tips?
Yeah, yes, Jason. I will give you all of the hairstyling tips.
I mean, we
And
don't have anybody else. You're the closest thing to an expert when it comes to hairstyling tips. So give me some hairstyling
Debbie
tips.
is like looking at me, kind of like you are looking at their phone and going like, "No, fuck you. You're not doing hairstyling tips."
Right?
No.
Sorry. Just the tip?
No,
Ask
no.
Devi for your beard advice.
Hair here's basically it would be like if you wanted to read a book on how to do it wrong, I would write that book.
Nice.
No, it's the Vice version. It's even worse. Uh,
Next week, we're going to have Jeffrey talk about watercolors or oil painting.
oh fuck that! I am not talking about either of those things. Yeah, what else do you want me to do? How to create a magnificent painting? Yeah,
Yep,
not
yep, yep,
happening.
yep.
You want to know what my advice is? Find yourself a good barber and
Yes.
listen to them, not me. That's my tip, because the reality is that they're going to know, once again, that they're going to know more about how to help you take care of your beard, especially like if you have any number of different skin issues, different challenges. They're going to
Right.
lean on a professional that knows what the fuck they're talking about, not in that regard,
I
because
love it.
that's my tip. Don't.
So our just the tip number one for better beard care for men is go to the refined man for your advice.
Well, yeah. That's where
Yeah,
Adam
no,
goes.
yeah, that's where Adam. Oh, burn.
That's that's Adam's. But yeah.
There you go. We're stealing the sponsor. Hey, what
But
about Trail Skate? Go to Trail Skate if you want a better skateboard. And don't forget Lashes by Jessica.
Adam's like, Adam, if he's listening, he's like, what the fuck, guys? No,
No, I
no,
love
he
it.
would
I
he'd be
love
like,
it.
and then of course, Debbie's shop, the Stone and Steel. That's because that's where they're at with their
Okay,
new.
let's give a
That's
shout
theirs.
out then. Wait, then let's do this. Our number one tip for better beer cat bitter wow.
Bitter, bitter Baird care.
Our bitter for
Bitter.
bitter beard care. Go to now I lost the name.
For number one tip for better beard care, go to the Stone and Steel.
Love it. Perfect.
Bitter Baird care. What the fuck?
We have so many titles in that episode alone. I don't even know what to do. Thank you for listening to Public Access America. We should be coming back right after this song. There we go.
There we go.
That's a good ending. I love that. We're gonna get. I'm just teasing Debbie now. If you really want the best quality advice, get yourself a partner like Debbie. You know what I mean? Get somebody like Debbie in your life.
Somebody who's literally just gonna sit there and be like, "Uh-huh, let's hear it. Let's hear what your fucking advice is, you fucking
Yeah.
dipshit. Let's go it. You want to dig your own grave today? Fucking do it. I'll hand you the shovel. Fuck it. I'm gonna go mix myself a drink and I'm gonna watch this shit. And
Right?
then
Like it or
and
not,
then I'm
she's
gonna
our number
bury
one
you in it."
fan. She's here
Uh,
every week. They're here
uh,
every week. I love it.
It's so fucking funny. Like
Yeah,
the one thing about Debbie is like Debbie is such such a fierce person when there's something they're extremely passionate about.
I
They
know.
they get this laugh like when somebody royally fucks up that I mean it's like your fucking spine goes straight,
Oh,
every
thank
hair on your
God.
body stands up on end, and your bowels will turn to liquid. And it's like they try and replicate it and they can't do it. It's only when they get into an argument or get really heated about something and they do this okay. And I mean it's like the way that they do it, like it fucking sends chills down my spine. I'm like, nope, this is not okay. This is definitely the opposite of okay. Like I am it's that fucking that Simpsons meme with Ralphie, I'm in danger.
I'm so happy I've never heard that from them.
Oh yeah. No,
Oh man.
it's hearing it, like that's the thing is like just hearing it, knowing it's not directed at you is enough to make your fucking, hair stand up on end. But
Sure.
having it directed at you, nope,
Mm-mm.
nope, nope,
I'm glad I've never
nope,
had
nope,
it.
nope, nope, nope.
Hey,
Mm-mm.
we're back at Public Access America. Don't forget you can find our podcast anywhere you find our favorite podcast, and you can find a live stream just like this one on YouTube for now, 11 a.m. Wait, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Central, 7 p.m. Europe. Let's give a shout out to Earkick. Hey, we had somebody reach out. I Was Born This Gay, a new podcast, reached
Oh,
out on
nice.
Red Circle. This guy, he is an expert in LGBT history in Russia in America.
Ooh,
And
wow. In
yeah,
Russia even.
he has
That's really cool.
his first episode is the hero of the fall of Russia, and he was a gay guy, and I'm excited to actually listen. I put it on because they sent us a request. Hey, where are you, Dan? We're just pausing, waiting for you.
He's muted.
What's up, folks? Yeah,
There he
I'm
is.
just letting you guys riff. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we got you.
yay!
And
All right,
that's a new logo since the last time I've been on.
yes, sir.
Can one
We
of you
got
guys move your Can one of you guys move your head so I can see the whole thing?
You
That's cool. I like that.
we wanted to get the politics out of it. People are tired of politics. So, and we're on episode 750.
Oh,
So
good
it's about
lord.
we want to be the podcast that advocates, not the podcast that discusses things that sound political.
For sure. I love it. I love it. Love the logo.
Yeah.
Nice and simple and effective. I'm a big fan of
Thank
that.
you. And we
yeah.
were in our last episode, we were talking about education and communication and, you know, earn getting experience, education through experience, getting it through academia, and how we all need to work together. And we actually called you out because you wanted to be the communication in there. And that was the missing link between all of it, because we decided that academia needs to work with people to create better.
Oh, I will rant about that for about 4 hours if you want me to. But I
Oh yeah.
completely agree. I think the integration of academia into society is long overdue. And
Okay.
there's a reason behind the ivory tower, and I'm happy to chat about that. But just in general, I really like the idea of rebranding to be more education advocacy, bringing people together focus. I think that's a really good idea.
Me too. I want more informed voices and experts offering their perspectives so that we can come up with diverse solutions. And I'm just going to kind of leave you two to talk about it, because last time you two were together, it was one of the greatest conversations I've gotten to listen to. So I just have fun. I don't I messaged Dan and I was like, what should we talk about? And he's like, I'll be there. And I messaged Jeffrey and he was like, oh hell yeah, Dan's gonna be there. And I was like, I don't know what you're gonna talk about. And he's like, I don't care. So I can't I can't even imagine to guess at what you two would want to talk about. But what's important to you, Dan? What's top of your mind this week?
Top of my mind this week. That's
Yeah.
really interesting. There's been a lot going on. I think it's been interesting because for the first time in probably over 2 years, the top news cycle has not been COVID. That doesn't mean that COVID's gone away by any stretch, but it's definitely gotten more manageable, and we definitely have a better handle on it. And my good friends who work in hospital infection control and government epidemiology, right there, there's a lot more confidence going around right now. But just seeing how the news cycle has shifted away from domestic health to foreign policy has been kind of an interesting shift. And I don't want to say back to normal because there's nothing normal about what's happening in Eastern Europe right now, and
No.
all the machinations in Ukraine with Russia and how NATO's responding and all of that. But it's just weird because I've been so used to waking up in the morning and just the first thing that and the only thing people talk about is just COVID, COVID, COVID. And it's interesting to have that shift in perspective and how that reflects kind of our shift in priorities and concerns as a country.
Mhm.
But I really, honestly, like you said, what do we want to talk about? I was like, I'll just be there and show up. So I'm happy
I
to just
love
riff
it.
on anything. But that's kind of where I've been reflecting. It's like, wait a second, there's things besides COVID. Even though
Yeah.
COVID's still there, how do we now this post-pandemic shift that we're having? How we're gonna kind of rebalance our priorities moving forward?
But do either
Ooh.
one of you feel a PTSD about the COVID times? When I thought about having you on, I remembered you starting as a contact tracer in Pennsylvania. You know, I think about
Oh yeah,
everywhere Dan has been in this pandemic, and I think to I tried watching a South Park episode, and it was about masks. I turned it off. I had this weird buzzing in my brain that said, I don't want to relive that.
yeah. I don't want to say PTSD, but there's definitely behavioral and emotional spurs that I get from the whole process. So, for example, like you mentioned, I started out in contact tracing, but then I moved up into just full on outbreak investigations at the peak of the pandemic in December 2020 with pre Delta. Um, in the first winter that we had with full winter we had with COVID, I was working as a local government epidemiologist where I was the on call guy for 14 different nursing homes dealing with
Oh,
outbreaks. I worked overtime on Christmas Day because that's how slammed everyone was. It was really, really bad, right?
Yeah.
And working a lot of time and just kind of coming back out of that. I've stepped away from that and gone and done other things as well. But I think just having the time to reflect on that, it's like there's been a lot of changes in my perspective. Um, and I think one thing that I'm very grateful for is that I've become a little more healthily skeptical and critical of certain things in public health. I'm not in any sense like I'm definitely supportive of vaccination and good infection control and masking. Like there's all kinds of evidence for that. But I think what's been really good is going through a really serious coming out of education and applied research and getting into the meat and potatoes of actual like public health emergency response. It's been interesting to see and reflect on how we can do better. Not just, I mean, everyone talks about the government and Trump or Biden or like the top levels, but how can we as a system, try and debrief what we can do? And now we finally have the breathing room to do that.
Mhm.
Because even though COVID has not gone away, and like I said in previous episodes, it's never going to go away. It's always going to be endemic. It's always going to be a public health concern we have to deal with. But we now have the space and the management techniques and the kind of low prevalence that we can start thinking about how we can retool for the next one, because there will be a next one, like I've said before. So I think, like, to summarize that rant, it's like I went through the experience. I saw a lot of stuff. I have a lot of names of dead people tattooed into my brain from it because that's what my job was in many ways, was helping all the situation. And now having the chance to reflect, I had a chance to reflect while COVID was still the main news cycle, while I wasn't working directly in public health. But now I have the chance to reflect even more now that it's not even the primary news cycle anymore. And it's just like another stage of separation and kind of feeling out who I've become after that ordeal. But that's kind of where I'm at. What do you guys think?
Well, that actually kind of moves into where I'm at, because, like you said, it's not even the main news cycle. And from a data perspective, one of the headlines that I've kind of seen pop up is, you know, the the media keeps popping up with, the BA2 subvariant of Omicron, and how, oh my God, it's become the predominant strain in the US. But as a data person, I'm looking at the data that exists, and even though it's become the predominant strain, during that time, cases just keep going down. And so it's like one of those things where it's like, mathematically speaking, like, and scientifically speaking, yeah, BA2 probably competes better, versus, BA 1.1 and then the original Omicron strain. But at the same time, those strains spread so fast that there might not necessarily be a lot of places left for BA2 to compete.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think it's important to consider, and I think we've talked about this in different chunks and different previous episodes that I've been on, but thinking about the evolution of infectious diseases is always based on the ecological niche that they can fill. And after every round of infection, there's a different series of niches that can be filled that depend on host immunity, the environmental conditions, and the actual agent itself, right? We always think about that as like the epidemiologic triad, host, agent, and environment. Those are the three major factors that, affect the spread or the severity of disease. And every kind of cycle that we have with COVID, there are new circumstances that the virus has to navigate. And so that drives evolution. It's not a conscious process. But yeah,
Mhm.
right now that ecological niche with the environment temperatures getting warmer, more people are spending time outside, that's happening. Our immunity is catching up, not just because vaccinations continue to grow, but more naturalized immunity, which is kind of probably shorter term and not as effective, but it's better than nothing. And people are getting boosted, and now with the FDA authorizing a second booster shot for people age 50 and older, right? There's all kinds of these different environmental changes, and the best that we can hope for is that it continues to kind of force the virus into a niche that is not really major. That doesn't mean that the virus itself is not deadly, but
Mhm.
as long as we can continue on this path, it'll continue going down. Now we're going to continue having cycles. I'm sure there's going to be spikes after major events. We're going to have an up in cases like after Memorial Day and Fourth of July, and it's definitely in the winter, just like we've been noticing
Right.
for the past couple of years. But now we can start having the realistic conversation of at a public health level, how much do we need to dedicate to it, and then
Mhm.
having those difficult discussions of saying, well, Omicron BA.2 can still cause severe disease, and there are people still being hospitalized, and people are immunocompromised, right? We need to be protective and supportive of those people, but what is the balance? And it's kind of what's that quote from? Is it the Imitation Game, the one about Alan Turing and the Enigma machine, starring
Mhm.
Benedict Cumberbatch? Is like the blood-soaked calculus. Like
Yep.
that's kind of this. That's a lot of like public health responses. Like what do we need to invest in order to cover the most number of people, knowing that we're not going to catch everybody, and how do we kind of reckon with ourselves that we're not going to catch everybody or protect absolutely everyone because we just physically can't. What do we
Right.
do for mitigation?
Right. And so, and that's the other question is that, right now, especially in this moment, we have more tools available to us than we ever have before. You've got you've got the shots that exist currently. You've got Omicron specific boosters that are being developed, and it sounds like they're going to be potentially deployed. I know that they had initially worked on Delta ones, but it was kind of one of those things where they figured out that there wasn't enough change that having a Delta specific booster was worthwhile. But Omicron perhaps. Um, you've got the Paxlovid protease inhibitor. You've got monoclonal antibodies prior and now specific to Omicron. It's We have more tools in the toolbox now than we ever had before. And so, like, for example, I was doing some math, I was doing some calculations looking at, like, you know here's what the risk of hospitalization and death looks like after 3 shots. Here's what it looks like if you have the shots but then you end up needing Paxlovid. Here's what that risk then multiplies down to. And if you're still not doing well, like, we have monoclonal antibodies, and if you end up getting that, mathematically speaking, it's like a 0.00018, or no, 0.0018% chance that you end up dead, is the way that I did the math based off of the available data. And so, realistically speaking, you have something that's gone to, quite literally what, a lot of people said is potentially less deadly than the flu. But that said, what do you think makes sense in terms of, like, how we look at, treating with the tools that we have now?
I first want to say that this is the end. This is kind of the end state that a lot of people were kind of focusing on for a while, like where we're
Right.
at right now. It's like, how do we get the whole flatten the curve, that all that stuff, which I still say that should have been the slogan that should have been painted on every building and on every
Hmm.
PSA, flatten the curve for years, right? right? Well, this is finally at the point where the curve is being flattened, right? And we're
Right.
like, oh crap, now what do we do? It's like, because we've been, all the mitigation measures and all the emergency response and health protocols that we've had have been because we did not have this barrage or this armory of tools to come to prevent and control and treat these diseases, right?
Hmm.
So I think it's just important for us to reflect on that. But in terms of what we can do, I think, and this goes back again, I keep saying what I said before, right? The cultural changes that happened during COVID, there are definitely things that we should continue supporting
Hmm.
in terms of a public health standpoint. First of all, staying home if you're sick. I mean, that should never ever come back. Like why we accepted that as a society is just, thinking of it now, absolutely beyond me, right? Having
Right.
hand sanitizer and hand hygiene stations and all these places that we, in public we can do, right? But in terms of how we're treating, we now have pretty robust understandings of which treatments are effective, which, and for what purposes and for what,
Hmm.
what levels. And so now we're at a point where federal agencies and state public health authorities that have been giving this emergency guidance can now shift their focus into saying, here are some clinical recommendations for, these combinations of certain things, right? So now we're actually shifting away from trying to do our best guess based on what we had in the past for other diseases, and now knowing enough about COVID that, like you said, we have all these tools, but we also know how to use them. So having the agencies that are involved in public health, emergency response, and preparedness, like all the same ones that are just involved in general public health, reshifting their focus to clinical considerations, indications, contraindications, right? Going back to what they were doing, I don't want to say antebellum, but anti-pandemicum or whatever,
Yeah.
right? So we're kind of reaching back to normal. It's like now we have a good grip on it. So in terms of
Hmm.
how should we do it, we should trust the authorities that have done their best to navigate through this really nasty crisis. And now we have data from a large number of really good medical scientists who have been publishing this. So that's kind of my general comment rather than saying, I don't want to, because I'm not a clinical pharmacist, I'm not a board
Right.
certified
Right.
physician, I'm not going to comment on specific combinations, but we do have this body that we can rely on now that we've been hoping to have for more than 2 years. And now we finally have it to proceed with.
But it
Thank you to
seems.
everybody in the daisy chain that got us to where we are. That shouldn't pass by without a big thank you to you
Mhm.
and everyone like you that got us here.
Thank you. Yeah, it
So.
was a slog for a lot of people,
It's
and
it's not said enough. It's not said enough because this science is messy and learning is messy, but we know more by doing that than we did by ignoring
Mhm.
tests. You remember when it was herd immunity and stop testing people? We wouldn't have known anything. We'd still be in the dark ages. So it's people like Jeffrey, people like Dan, their associates, the people they work with, the people they fought for that actually made the difference that got us to an endemic stage.
and to reflect back on Jason, of course, like the people who were willing to continue having the platforms for us to talk about these things and to
Mhm.
continue to encourage the process, while we were all wrestling with all this as a scientific entity or scientific bodies, right? Having the ability for us to kind of share and continue to have the patience of the public and the media and the providers of the platforms that we needed in order to
Mhm.
not just find things out, but disseminate that. Like I said, communication, like that's the most important part. What's the point of having all the knowledge if you don't share it? We
Right.
need
And
people like you, Jason, and a lot of other folks involved who are going to continue caring about public health, even though it's easy to say, oh, COVID's over. It's like, no, it's not over, but there's always going to continue to be public health needs. And hopefully that's
right.
going to be another change in our society that we continue to give public health issues the credence that they deserve rather than just having them be kind of like a flashy,
Agreed.
like a new study proves that wine doesn't cause cancer, right? No, let's increase the quality of our science communication permanently, just as we
Mhm.
are increasing our availability of hand sanitizer and the concept of
Mhm.
people staying home and the people, like, I am sick is a completely reasonable thing for someone to not come to do something, right?
That's
it's
right.
it's it has to be paired together, and those are the preventative measures that are going to take us a long way rather than just relying on, oh, they'll find a new drug eventually.
So I got two questions for you, Dan. The first one is
Yeah.
one that you might not necessarily be able to give an answer to, but it seems like we've now shifted towards endemic care of the virus. A lot of places are kind of doing that across Europe, and that's what it feels like is that we understand that we're going to live with the virus. We have a bunch of tools. Some countries have said, yes, we're switching to endemic care. We haven't exactly come out and said that yet either. But it really does feel like that's where we're headed with the relaxing of masking, mandates, the acknowledgement that we have all of these tools. For
Ending
example,
Title
that
42, by the way, as well.
ending Title 42, the whole test to receive Paxlovid at a local pharmacy, all of these kind of things that are, just kind of seem like we're moving away from this idea of this being a pandemic into treating it endemic, like the like influenza.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That is honestly where we're at. And some people are not going to be willing to come out and say that because for a number of reasons. One, I think a lot of the feedback, some folks who are kind of excessively critical of the process will be like, see, it's all resolved, it's all fine. You just made a whole thing, you want to make this permanent, right? Come up with all this unfair criticism of saying, well, you guys all did all this stuff and for the last 2 years and it was all bullshit, right? No, it wasn't. But
It
I
wasn't.
think if someone comes up and says, hey, we're now in an endemic stage, I think a lot of people who will say negative things about the last 2 years and public opinion will drop being like, well, really, we just got here anyways, not understanding kind of how the epidemiology works. But you're definitely right. We are at that stage. And I think what happens now, just kind of comparing that to how we manage infectious diseases of other types that are either endemic or kind of sporadic, where they pop up every once in a while in certain places.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the care, you know, would that I could should be focusing on targeting high risk individuals, making sure that they have access to the supplies and the preventive care that they need. Vaccine distribution in this country is still very uneven. So they'll like working on those. And these are the same things that we work on for like influenza vaccination rates or,
Right.
disease surveillance in communities where surveillance is a challenge for all kinds of reasons, right? It's going to shift. It already has shifted, but mainly with COVID, more towards treating COVID as, I don't want to say another disease, but another disease, right? We
Mm-hmm.
we have systems in place where we do this. I think just what I'm hopeful for is that the publicity of the last couple of years will continue a push saying, hey, these are things that we need to fund because an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, just for whatever it is, whether it's a coronavirus, if it's influenza, if it's tuberculosis, whatever it is, right?
Right.
So it really is, that is where we're at. I'm just hoping that we're at, pre-pandemic 2.0, where we know what's going on and we have greater attention and greater care and just greater societal acceptance and endorsement of infection control practices that will be a little bit more safe. And next time we have a pandemic, not having a chronic shortage of toilet paper and bleach and hand sanitizer,
And
because
hot pockets.
now we know how people are going to respond when there's a once in a lifetime pandemic, which will be in the next 10, 15, 20 years. You mark my words, right? How do we prepare the supply chains to manage that? How do we make sure that
Right.
policies that, what are some of the policies that we realized were very intimately linked with the pandemic response? You know, how
Yeah.
do we make sure that there's proper internet access to people who need to work remotely if they need to work from home, right? All these things that we found out along the way, now we're at a point of like recovery. And it
Mm-hmm.
just goes through like, that there was a preparedness stage, then there was an impact stage where COVID hit. Now we've been in like response mode, and now we're kind of shifting to like the final mode of like emergency management, which is like recovery.
And analyzing it. That's what I love about it. We know
Yeah,
so much about pandemics now and
yeah,
people's responses to them.
for
Now
sure.
here's
The after action review is what is
Yep.
happening now and what we
I,
need to work on.
I just wish there was more books about that than there was about Donald Trump's presidency. You know what I mean?
We'll get
Well,
there.
We should, I wish,
you got to see
yeah,
who what will sell though, right? That's
Yeah.
unfortunate, but yeah.
that is unfortunate.
Now here's
I
question
wish we
number
could
2.
teach people to read beyond the headline. I'm sorry, Jeffrey. Go ahead.
Oh, it's all right. Now, so here's question number 2. So now I'm going to dig into public health, brain Dan.
Oh, here.
So
Yay.
over the course of the pandemic, one of the things that we learned from a technological standpoint is that the ability to work from home, once thought of as a was a pipe dream, became a reality. But like you said, this idea of stay home if you're sick, you know, one of the things that we have, the biggest issue of is number one, access to sick leave, I would say, for a lot of people. But also number two, I think you have a lot of companies that are seeing this idea of, return to office, and that you're never going to have the need to work from home again. There's a lot of companies out there that have said, no, we're just going to go totally remote. We don't have to deal with all the overhead. But from a public health standpoint, do you think that there would be viable guidance in how, let's say, you might not necessarily, you kind of solve two problems. Number one, you might not necessarily have companies increasing sick leave, but have a policy that increases their ability to allow people to work from home if they're sick. Because let's face it, I'm the kind of person who has always worked sick. It's just what I do. I'm miserable anyways. I might as well be miserable and not have to deal with an entire day of catching up on emails.
Yeah. Well, I think and this is where you start getting into public health law and policy and what is the lane of different agencies getting involved, right? The CDC is not just this catch-all for everything that related to health and disease, right? There's certain things that they are and are not allowed to do, just like certain state health departments, just like, the
Mhm.
Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, right?
Yeah.
So now in terms of, are you going to make a recommendation for people to continue to work from home, right? I think it's completely fair for some entity to come out and say, look, there is evidence showing that work from home and allowing work restrictions for people who are ill is an effective way to control disease in workplaces, right? We have plenty of data on that, right?
Mhm.
And
Not just in
that's an
healthcare
important
facilities.
thing to do. That's something we should focus on.
Yeah, and there's definitely recommendations that can be made at state and federal levels to support that. But how does that get translated into policy? And is it the role of the federal government and is it the role of public health agencies to try and institute policy saying you have to allow for, work from home? Whose authority is that? And that answer gets
Mhm.
messy, right? We talked in a previous episode about how the Supreme Court shot down the federal vaccine mandate
Right.
because the mandate was structured to be OSHA making it, but then the argument that won was ultimately, well, COVID is not exclusively a workplace hazard exposure thing, so you can't just have OSHA regulate something that's like outside of the workspace, right? OSHA
Right.
has a lane. One can debate what the width of that lane is, right? Just like the CDC has a lane, just
Mhm.
like the FDA has a lane. So in terms of adding those recommendations, I think it's completely reasonable for those recommendations to come into play because they exist. But now
Mhm.
it comes into this interesting question of like with American society, we do have a little bit more laissez-faire, regulatory agencies as compared to say a lot of Western European or Central European countries. You know, Look at what's happening with the workforce now, right? The
Mhm.
workforce is making a lot of these demands, and what was people calling it the Great Resignation as
Yep.
opposed to
Uh-huh.
the Great Recession, right? Now you're starting to, I'm walking around, I'm seeing Chipotle offering $15 an hour minimum with 401ks, right?
Yep.
How much does
Right.
the workforce have to play in forcing prospective employers that are hurting for personnel to say, yeah, let's do it hybrid? And also, was it
Mhm.
JP Morgan that was like, or was it Chase or some bigger banking entity said, oh, 100% of people have to come back into the office, and then like
Goldman
only half of
Sachs.
them, Goldman Sachs, right? And then half of them just didn't, right?
Yep.
You can't fire half your workforce, right? So I think and this is kind of linking back to our discussion about the policies and the procedures that we didn't really perceive to be part of the pandemic at the first stage when we started doing lockdowns, right?
Mhm.
Supply chain management, personnel management, work from home management, IT management, right? One of
Mhm.
those other things is, the workforce is going to define whether at the end of the day, the workforce is going to define how much you are going to do, right?
Right.
And
Right.
if the American workers are like, yeah, no, screw this, I'm not going to come into work because I have two kids who are immunocompromised, and what's the point of me sitting in an office next to Jerry who coughs and sneezes all the time and his bouts of COPD induced, I don't know, asthma spreading my diseases,
Oh,
right? Why am I going
Jerry.
to do that and then bring that down to whoever, right? There's
Right.
going to be a lot of millions of individual decisions are lining up together in really unprecedented ways, and I think it's sociologically fascinating. But
Me
So
it
too.
also plays into, is it the government's job to say certain things and mandate certain things? If
So
so,
here's
which government agency is responsible? And if not, what can the workers do to ensure that they have optimal conditions that actually benefit their public health and their preferences?
Work
Sorry,
for the
Jeffrey,
this
go
federal
ahead.
this
government.
is where this gets interesting because, like, for example, because I work in risk, one of the things that, risk brain me goes, so if you have to be concerned about employee productivity all the time. We think about things like, if our IT goes down, if we have a DDoS attack, if we have some type of major event like an earthquake or a tornado or a hurricane or whatever that compromises our ability to do work. And in a lot of cases, most people don't really think about it, but the cost of productivity during pre-pandemic cold and flu cycles was always really heavy. Why? Because you had a bunch of people sardined into rooms. They would ultimately end up getting each other sick, and you would just have this rotation throughout your building for a while where you would probably be down anywhere from 10 to 25% of your staff because
Mm.
they're all out sick with the flu. So what we have learned through COVID is that having work from home protocols, especially as you have someone who is in your building or in your immediate area that gets sick and you get sent home, it helps you, like, as we all know, it helped contain the spread. So the question then becomes, if you were to issue guidance, obviously it's not something where I think that, public health is going to be able to sit down and make the law of you have to offer work from home, but as a way of businesses being able to mitigate risk, showing the data of how having a work from home option as cold and flu season hits, not only number one, reduces the chance that you're going to have multiple staff members out because of illness, but number two, the fact that you're going to be able to keep productivity. There's going to be, I think, there's
Yeah,
definitely an avenue for public health to be able to say, look, we can't make a rule, but based off of a lot of observed evidence, here is a guidance that we would suggest that every business look at and review with all seriousness. As number one, it's going to help you in terms of the cost of being able to keep people in the office and productive just because you won't have them out sick. But also, number two, it allows them to have that ability and flexibility to plan in a risk-based environment, saying, look, here's what local health guidance is for any number of issues, and this is how we can fit this into our own business plan. It's not a something that the government is enforcing upon us, but because of the data that's available, it's a solid recommendation that can be made that businesses can plan for and decide on their own whether or not that's something they want to implement.
for sure. And that's kind of you're really nicely setting up the differences between different federal agencies when it comes to these things. So OSHA would definitely be able to, if they wanted to, try to implement certain regulations. And they definitely have updated a ton of regulations regarding like work restrictions related to COVID, but then now kind of shifting more towards the preventative,
Mhm.
preparedness side. How does this, are you going to allow for, delay, how quickly do you need to update your air ventilation systems or HVAC systems? Because now we know that proper filtration of air and ventilation is effective to control
Hmm.
COVID. And we've known for decades that it's, not just COVID, but there's all kinds of standards in like operating rooms and healthcare fields for like how you filter your air, right? That's just one of many, a million different examples versus guidance from the CDC that is just general guidance. And then it gets really hairy and interesting because now not only do you have regulations that you have to abide by, but then you have in the world of guidance versus regulation, you have the wonderful beast of the class action lawsuit,
Mhm.
wherein dozens of workers at a particular location, if they have the ability to do so, who say, okay, they are negligent on, they're falling behind on guidance, right? This guidance is not being adhered to, but it's still guidance. They're just being flagrantly unsupportive of us in our public health desires and demands as a workforce.
Mhm.
We're going to sue, or we're going to mass resign, or we're going to do X, Y, and Z, not because you're violating a law inherently, but because there's so much evidence that you should be doing this. There's no official law, so you say screw it. Where is that boundary? Are you going to have the government come in and enforce regulations on the business, or is the business going to shut down because half the workforce leaves because they don't like their employees? And I think one thing that this also ties into, we're talking about cultural changes and workforce changes. It really is going to be. I would hope, as a public health specialist and an infectious disease epidemiologist, that the number one changes that we would have in our society would be based on purely on disease control. But I genuinely think, my logic American brain, right, as a citizen and as a worker and as an employee, I think the number one change that we're going to see culturally after COVID is the en masse by the millions workers saying, why do I have to stand for this shit?
Hmm.
Right? That's kind of the number one thing that I think is going to, in American culture, I think the cultural change is going to be focused on that. And it kind of reflects the road to progress and innovation in this country and across most of the world is
Hmm.
marred by milestones of mass death and chaos, right? We like, I remember learning in high school about what we call the long 19th century, right? The 19th century, like, of American and British and European imperialism that didn't end in 1900, but it ended after the First World War and into the Second World War, because there was this massive cultural change from the First World War. The
Hmm.
women's workforce movement that amplified during the Second World War, because millions of American men were not able to run the factories and everything, and then they came back to households where the women were like, we've been running our shit for just fine without you, so what do we do, right? So
Right.
these cultural changes that keep happening, that are instilled by massive crises involving lots of woe and death and suffering,
Hmm.
have been marking our changes in our culture. And I think is already doing exactly that. So now, what are we going to see in the next 10 to 15 years as the generation that kind of came of age in the workforce during COVID is progressing, just as we have seen the cultural changes even in the last 20 years of, like, well, the Great Recession, that the elder millennials that came of age at that point and started getting blamed for everything under the sun as they were trying to progress into jobs under the Great Recession. Like, you
Hmm.
go back every major step. I think that's going to be the major change to watch, more so than the public health recommendations, which at the end of the day are going to be like, here are things that we already know on a general scale. Here's some more detailed information. Here's a couple more vaccines and therapeutics that we can add to our arsenal, and then kind of evolve to hopefully be more high profile, as opposed to this massive shift in culture that we're thinking about. And I'm
So
just
labor, so
really, I don't want to
labor
say
empowerment.
excited. I'm just very curious, and like, this is going to be very interesting to watch from a scholarly perspective. I'm sorry.
We're
Please go ahead, Jason.
we're seeing that labor empowerment at Disney right now, where employees are protesting the "Don't Say Gay" in Florida. We're seeing unionization in Amazon plants. So we're seeing what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I
I
mean,
think what's
I
what's
even I quit my job a couple weeks ago because I was tired of the way that I was being treated, right?
And I think
I
what's interesting is what Jeffrey was talking about. If we did a study on viruses affecting the workforce and compared that to viruses affecting the infrastructure, cyber, I think we could learn that we're losing just as much money on the productivity of people getting sick as we are our computer systems getting viruses.
Yeah, and I think now this is going to be, and I think the point I was leading into was that, talk about the long 19th century. I wonder if we can start thinking about how this is a kind of a cultural shift that's reminiscent of, I don't know, a long 20th century, right? We have the amazing technology of the internet and all this instant communication, access to instant information that we have, but now, the office was the office still. Just instead of having, files and typewriters and Rolodexes, we had a bunch of computers on a bunch of desks.
Hmm.
Now the workspace is going to look very different because of these demands being enforced upon by the American workforce. And folks like Jeffrey, who are in risk, you're now going to think, okay, we need to really up our cyber, because we don't just have one intranet that we can control. We now have a lot of VPNs, a lot of people remoting in. We're going to have to face these challenges because it's just not going to go away.
Right.
And the idea of, do we need to work 5 days a week? Like, I tell you, the job that I left, right? I didn't like the way I was being treated, but I was not working 40 hours a week. I was doing what they asked me to do, and I was done. And, like, if you actually compiled all of it, I could have done it in 2.5 days, and I was just as efficient, more efficient, if anything, than if they brought me into an office. So now that begs the question: do you need me to run your business if you're going to work me realistically 2.5 days? Or do you need everyone to be working 4 days instead of 5 days? Or are you going to have the size of your workforce, and then what are you going to do with the people who are not going to be working because they're not needed for companies that are now all of a sudden much more automated and efficient because they don't have to have a bunch of centralized infrastructure, right?
Mhm.
All these questions are going to really come down hard in the next 10, 15 years. And because of the changes that we saw in ourselves and the possibilities that emerged or that we realized were possible because of the forces of the pandemic. And that's how infectious diseases have been since the dawn of time. Pandemics have shifted massively shifted cultures. You look to the Black Death in the 1300s and 1400s in the UK, right? You look
Mhm.
at the pandemic influenza in the 1900s, right? Infectious diseases have always shifted and shaped the course of cultural human history, and we're just living through that latest iteration right now. And it's something that we need to embrace. We don't have to be happy about it per se, but we have to acknowledge that it exists, because if we keep denying it, we're going to just keep losing ground. So I completely agree with what you guys are saying. There's all kinds of these new challenges, and we can't shy away from them because it's not going to stop. It's going to
Right.
keep going, and there's going to be another, major shift, probably related to some kind of infectious disease pandemic in the next within our lifetimes.
Mhm.
Agreed.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
now let's talk about something even more fun.
Oh, here we go.
Because we can't, we really can't ignore what's happening in Eastern Europe, and it's been kind of an interesting one. But let's talk about public health and war in Ukraine. I think there's probably something to be said about the way, the way that health, the way that you look at health and the way that you look at an active war zone that we don't really talk about. We're
It's
used to
been
the
on my
idea
head,
of,
actually. I've wondered about that. COVID in Ukraine. Why aren't we talking about
well,
that
not even
more?
just COVID in Ukraine. I would say, like, what are we looking at as a whole, because you do have this mass influx of people into Poland and other EU nations, but also too, you start to see other health issues arise when you have, constant bombardment, lack of food, lack of medical supplies being able to get in. I mean, any number of things. So what are you seeing, Dan?
Well, to start off with a bit of dark humor, I saw a really just brutally funny TikTok the other day where somebody went on to, how Google, you can just do like coronavirus insert place here and you can see the trends because they start drafting it. You do coronavirus Ukraine, right? And all of a sudden it just goes to zero after the invasion. It's like they solved coronavirus by getting invaded, right? It's like absolutely brutal. But no, it raises a really interesting point, is that priorities can really shift when you have major cataclysmic events going on. And for Ukraine, they're literally fighting for the sovereignty of their country. They don't they're probably diverting all the resources they have available away from public health and disease prevention, away from those entities, more towards keeping alive and keeping functioning. And I think it's interesting to see that interplay too. But it is interesting as well because public health and sanitation and hygiene don't go away when you get invaded, and if anything, they get doubly or triply important, right? You to go back to
Hmm.
the Civil War, two-thirds of the two-thirds of the casualties in the Civil War are from diseases and non-battle injuries, or what we call in the military DNBIs, right? We
Revolutionary War too. Same thing.
Yeah, it's our Revolutionary War, right? 70% to 80% were, not from combat, right? If you actually look at the numbers of people who died in the battles in the Revolutionary War, they were in the hundreds, and most of them. It's like obviously tragic, right? But you compare that to the thousands or tens of thousands that you've seen in other wars, right? It's because, you lose half your army on the march through the swamps. But that's exactly what Ukraine is facing right now. They're now facing issues of like, how do you keep the lights on in the hospital while the entire city is getting bombed? That's another part of like, that's something that infectious disease epidemiology and infection control and prevention and preparedness is intimately involved in. It's just that their priorities have shifted away from, surveillance at a national level and national level distribution of certain things to literally having just the basic functions of society still be there, right? What happens when you've completely destroyed a town and there are 30,000 people in there and there's no functioning sewers, right? It's the same stuff that happened, like,
Right.
with Hurricane Katrina, right? Or any of the major hurricanes that hit the American Southeast. Like, there's days to weeks, and sometimes with
Dysentery,
Katrina, even
right?
months,
Ugh.
where, yeah, you have these really nasty diarrheal diseases, waterborne illnesses, foodborne illnesses. You can't get safe food in there, right? That's where your priorities of public health shift when you have major cataclysmic level crises in your area. And unfortunately, Ukraine has been facing that on literally every front that they have. And we don't even know what the numbers of people who've died or been killed either by just direct combat or civilians killed in firefights or war crimes, or God knows what's going on. But what's clear is that Ukraine's infrastructure is absolutely decimated, and with that comes the post impact levels of public health concern, or the impacts of public health concern, which is often foodborne, waterborne diseases. If you have a lot of people in shelters, respiratory illnesses that thrive in there, right? So you need public health to maintain itself, but you're going to lose out on, like, the federal surveillance infrastructure, which requires a lot of time, money, infrastructure, dedication, manpower in order to run that Ukraine just doesn't have the privilege of running right now. So that's kind of my general perspective on that. So
And
Mhm.
Russia's dealing with the same stuff, I'm imagining. You know what I mean? They just left Chernobyl, and we found that they had dug trenches there so that they could lay in radiated dirt. Like what's going to come out of that?
that's what happens. Well, it's not so much like the dirt around there is not they're not reopening the core, but it also kind of highlights the fact that in terms of their military strategy, they weren't particularly effective at communicating risk, right?
Right.
And
Mhm.
when in the military, whenever there's, or at least in the army, right, whenever there's a unit that deploys overseas, one of the fundamental things they have to do is, first of all, make sure everyone's up on their vaccinations, and make sure that they have, all their details up. They do pre-deployment screenings and, like, dental work and physicals. There's all kinds of pre-screenings to make sure that you're not putting people into a remote combat environment where they're going to be out of the fight because of something not related to combat. But also, you have to do health threats briefings. You have to make sure that your soldiers or sailors or airmen or marines or guardians, whoever's going where, you have to make sure that they are aware of the health threats that they're going to face that are not bullets coming from downrange, right?
Right.
And that's
Mhm.
something that clearly either that those groups of soldiers did not pay attention to, or Russia did not heed carefully enough, thinking, oh, whatever, it's a loss. But like we said before, historically, the grand majority of casualties in war among fighting armies and navies has been, the diseases and the non-battle
Yeah.
injuries, as
Mhm.
opposed to direct action. So if you just ignore all of that, you're only going to weaken your fighting force, and as a result, be less effective at winning wars. And I wonder how much, because we don't have a lot of that information, right? How much of the Russian convoy that stopped, how much of that was due to, like, people just weren't prepared? How much of it was due to
Right.
cold weather injury? How much of it was to crappy
Mhm.
rations that people got sick on,
Mm.
right? What percentage of the people have they had to pull back on, and how much of that has affected their military strategy
Right.
because they did not do a sufficient job of preparing for the diseases and non-battle injuries that plague the fighting force, right? And
Interesting.
not
Mhm.
to disclose too much information about myself, but this is literally what I do for a living, right?
Right.
Controlling and preventing diseases and non-battle injuries is like, I'm exceptionally
Interesting.
qualified to talk about that without declaring too much.
I was just
So,
thinking about Vietnam and World War II, how venereal diseases almost brought down the army. So it's
Yeah.
interesting to think we don't know what disease is affecting this war. And to find that out later, that would be really interesting
Yeah.
on
I
the
mean,
longer timeline.
my favorite little factoid that's kind of more relevant. I know World War II is over almost, it's like 80 years ago, right? But in the Sicily campaign, where the United States and the UK invaded Sicily on its way up to capture Italy, there were more hospitalizations among American soldiers for influenza than there were for combat.
Interesting.
Now, what happens if you have effective respiratory disease control, where all of a sudden you more than double your hospital capacity? Now, in terms of, as a military commander, you start having very interesting discussions that can open on a table of what is our actual acceptable casualty rate. How much forward support infrastructure are we going to need in order to support those casualties? Or how much can we reduce? How much support and sustainment can we reduce if we have effective disease control measures? It's a really fascinating concept of war that people don't really appreciate because it's much more interesting to talk about the guns and the bullets and the fighting and the heroism and everything. And I get that, but the sustainment wins wars,
Hmm.
right?
And Jeffrey, that was
Hmm.
awesome.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's one of the things, I've always heard is that, an army fights on their stomach. And, when you think about it, at least from a health perspective, if you're not being fed well, it makes it really difficult to fight off a lot of those infections you might get, when your rations are bad, and you literally just aren't getting the caloric intake that you need in order to keep just your normal standards of human functions up. That lends to a whole lot of issues. That lends to, number one, your ability to even fight, and number two, your ability for your immune system to even fight. Not to mention, like, when you're dealing with extreme external factors, like, when they had that cold snap, that there haven't been any official numbers, but it certainly took a lot of Russians out of the fight because they didn't have proper cold weather gear.
No, you're absolutely right. And now you start thinking about it's not just about having the procedures, but having the supply and logistics, right?
Hmm.
There's a reason why, there's within the army division structure, right? There's a
Hmm.
division commander who's usually a two-star general, and there's two deputy commanders. There's a one-star who's a deputy commander for maneuver, which is combat, and there's a deputy commander for sustainment. There's an entire one-star general with their own like whole thing. Their focus is sustainment for division level, and their job is that because they are co-equal, right? It doesn't, what's the joke? Bullets don't fly without supply, right? I've
Hmm.
heard that one. Like it's really critical to consider all those things, and we don't have enough information about Russia's planning to know all of those details. But it's pretty clear to see from what we've been able to observe that they did too much. They expected to not need nearly as much sustainment as they did, and that has been a critical failure in their supplies because they were expecting just waltzing through Ukraine in a few days. And if
Hmm.
they waltz through Ukraine in a few days, they brought more than enough, right? But
Right.
now it's a months-long campaign, which is also brutally ironic because that's literally how Russia has won every war of invasion into their territory going back 6 centuries. Is that everyone underestimated how much time it would actually take to get through Russia, and they died because of the supply and sustainment issue. And it's ironic that Russia didn't learn from its own victories.
Yeah, the whole like never invade Russia in winter is now like, Russia and invasion in winter is a bad decision, period. It
Yeah,
doesn't matter if
yeah,
you're
yeah.
invading or being invaded.
And the whole argument, well, Ukraine's naturally part of Russia, was like, well, you're then invading part of Russia in winter. Good luck with that, folks.
Yeah, yeah. I guess if you're Russian and you think that Ukraine is Russian and say never invade Russia in winter, you royally fucked up your own calculus on that one.
Absolutely.
It's your
Yeah,
slogan. So
absolutely. No, it's been interesting to watch for sure, though. But I think there's definitely lessons learned, and there's plenty of pogues that I know in the military side who are like, that's why I have a job, right? That's great.
right. So no, it definitely makes things interesting to see, and especially because like I you know it like, and you can probably speak better to this than I can, but like that, you know and when you have plenty of food, your morale is always a lot higher. It's when you start, with that first basic need, the lack of food, your morale is going to tank really quickly. And I mean, you saw that after a week that, when Russian soldiers would get captured, there were just video after video after video of them just stuffing their faces. So it's like, even for after just a week, it was like, holy cow, did they not plan for more than 2 days? Like, that's a pretty significant gap in at least having available food sources.
And it makes you wonder at what level of preparedness or what level of hierarchy did that fallout happen. And you have to think, right, just again, and I'm not an expert in military command and everything by any stretch. I do know my fair share, but I'm not a global expert by any stretch. But you have to imagine that it's probably was at a very high level that these mistakes were happening because it's a systemic issue. It's not that one or two brigades or one division of Russian fighters um, went down or stopped fighting because of sustainment issues. It's that literally like their entire major offensive along their northern front ground to a halt, and now they're to the point where they're now trying to rebrand themselves as like they're doing an Eastern Front only, and they abandon their assault on the Ukrainian capital. Like that level of redirection because of major issues can only happen at very high command levels. And you go back to like, Vietnam and Second World War and even the First World War, like when those major campaigns failed, it was because of decisions at the top that were then trickled down, as opposed to lots of simultaneously bad decisions happening at the bottom coming up. And again, we don't have a lot of evidence to suggest that. We don't have the definitive proof. We don't have, Putin's emails.
Right.
Yeah, her emails, lock him up, right? But
We
Sounds like he's
predicted
locking
that.
sorry,
himself up.
We
I know,
predicted
basically.
that 2 weeks ago that he would rebrand it and just go for that East. And I think about in America we call what you're talking about the blob. And we talked about that in Afghanistan, and how it collapsed so fast in Afghanistan was the fact that we removed the blob before our forces. And Russia has a real poor blob, I guess. Their infrastructure, their supply chains just they weren't very quality, and now they're stealing food that's supposed to go into these towns. They're stealing it for themselves. So yeah, there's a desperation in the Russian army, but they still have a 10-1 odds.
I know it's really interesting to see. I'm gonna sit and try, and again, it it feels kind of crass to think about this and not think about the empathy for the Ukrainian people, but like they are going through some real rough stuff right now, and it, like you said, it's even rougher because not only like not that it wouldn't be rough if the Russians did their job properly and were able to completely destroy Ukraine, right? That would be terrible,
Mhm.
but the reason for their suffering in this particular case is because in many cases the Russians were not properly prepared. And now they're going
Right.
through and thinking, oh crap, we actually needed a lot more support in order to properly occupy and hold the city. Like now we're going to start murdering people, right?
Mhm.
There's all kinds of things that happen as downstream effects of when you don't properly plan things out. And that's, the reason why we were able to become a global superpower after the Second World War is because we just devoted our entire economy to winning the war. And we had all the supplies, we all had all the logistics, we were able to prepare, we timed things properly. And one could even say in certain campaigns we're too cautious and too
Mhm.
well prepared in order to be
Mhm.
effective. But then, if you especially look at the Pacific campaign, look at Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Peleliu, these campaigns that took weeks when they were expecting to take days, because they had proper supply chains, they were able to continue the offensive, right?
Mhm.
And the decision to drop the atomic bomb was all based mainly on supply chain and casualty rates. Right, we were not going to be able to sustain a land invasion of Japan by manpower or supply for months, if not years, at the end of the
Mhm.
Second World War. So that was what ultimately took their decision. So it's really critical for us to acknowledge and accept that, and but also to be empathetic to its actual impact on the ground, on the people who are just trying to live their lives, just trying to farm their wheat, and just trying to be
Yeah.
21st century ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, right, just wanting to vibe. And and another country's like, no, no, we're going to ignore all of human history and dominate you because you belong to us, because you never did, but we don't care. It's been
E-
really interesting to see that dynamic.
It's
Right.
even harder to have empathy for the Russian soldier that doesn't want to be there because they didn't know this was what they were going to do. There's some really bad Russian soldiers out there, like indiscriminately bombing civilians, but there's a lot of good people that didn't intend on this, that are just trying to get out
Oof.
of it. And
Yeah.
that's a shitty thing to have to deal with at the same time, giving empathy to your attacker. But these
Hmm.
are these are 18-year-olds. These are young people killing babies, and somebody's having them do that. We got to remember that it's not the soldiers as much following, they're just following orders. And I don't know.
It's like also I mean, there's the war crimes issue, but also like the most of their army is following orders to go in there, and like
Hmm.
the Russian casualties are definitely really high, but you're absolutely right, there's a lot of conscripts who are just coming in and just not even seeing combat. They're just being flung into the rural parts of Ukraine without adequate supply and adequate understanding, and kids getting captured, 16, 17-year-old kids getting captured and calling home. We see the videos of them being like, we didn't know where we were going, we are just told to do this direction, and we found ourselves in Ukraine. Now I'm captured and I'm lost and I want to come home. It's like,
Yeah.
you have to have empathy, because you think, I wouldn't want to be in that position.
Right.
And it, it kind of it makes me reflect on the JFK quote from back at the height of the one of the heights of the Cold War, where he's like talking about the Iron Curtain. And it's a paraphrase, like, say what you want about capitalism and our culture, and it is not without sin and it is not without flaw by any stretch, but we've never had to build a wall to keep our people in.
Right.
And I think that's kind of the same idea as like the Americans, even throughout the original Afghanistan and Iraq campaigns, which were controversial from the beginning, but even during the surge, we never had a shortage of people who are willing to sign up because at the very minimum they trusted that certain things were going to go right. Did they go right all the time? Absolutely not. Were the reasons for us being in those locations justified? That's a big conversation for another day, right? But at the
Right.
end of the day, we did not have to forcibly conscript hundreds of thousands of underage men just to fill the ranks to fulfill these certain desires. We had a sufficient standing army to fulfill the goals of the country. And
Yep.
it's kind of a testament to our ability to do that in our society as opposed to what Russia's been trying to do.
Do you ever think that the legacy of the Middle East would be soldiers suffering from the effects of burn pits?
Oh yeah, yeah. Um, Again, I know a thing or two about that, and the number one challenges that we're facing right now are the long-term effects of not just the PTSD and the suicide and the mental health of the trauma and everything, but we got really good at the fighting, but there are definitely shortcomings that we've had to deal with on the long term. We have a trouble of like we have our trouble in our society is that we can't do the long term finishing stuff really well. And that's why I'm a little concerned about with going back to COVID. How are we going to like make sure that COVID doesn't happen again to the best of our ability? How are we going to make sure that these things continue to carry forward, right? We're very good at we're very effective at mobilizing for an immediate crisis, but how do we do it year 15, year 20? Right,
Right.
that'll be interesting to see, and yeah, that's what we're facing with the burn pits and everything in Afghanistan. I think the major legacy is going to be while we were while we were dumping a lot of money into the Middle East for stability, China was dumping up that just as much money, if not more so, into developing sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia.
That's right.
And now that's going to face the new socio-political dynamic of the next 60, 70 years is going to be how are we going to navigate this co-superpower relationship with China because they are really on par with us, in some cases superior than us in terms of their breadth and their strength and their abilities. So how do we navigate that while also navigating systemic issues like climate change, emerging infectious diseases, healthcare access? It's going to be very interesting to see, and I hope that you guys will do another 750 episodes to cover that time.
Yeah.
Oh, it'll be fun.
I got to worry about space. Russia and China are combining their efforts to create a space station. We're going to be locked out of space soon,
Space Force.
Space Wars. So this is the awkward time when I ask you guys for a just the tip, something to better somebody's life. And I'm gonna let Jeffrey start so that Dan can have a running start at his. You have any just the tips, Jeffrey?
Oh, just a tip. Let's see. When playing Metro Exodus, uh, definitely make sure that you stock up on as much materials as possible to make ammo and clean your weapons. Because let's be real honest, Metro is a really fun game, and most people don't tend to think about like figuring out like how you're going to be able to sustain combat. And it's kind of funny because like as I've been playing Metro Exodus and looking at how things have gone in Ukraine, I'm like, man, this there's something about this that feels a little too like close
Real,
to what's
right?
happened.
Oh,
And so like, resource management is really important in the game, and being making sure that you have the resources that you need to sustain the fight is really important in Metro Exodus, but just in
right.
general.
My just the tip is you win every argument you walk away from. How about you, Dan?
I'm going to stick with the video game theme a little bit. If you have a VR headset and you play games on that, make sure that you are hydrated before you start playing because then first of all, it's not just like it could be tiring on your body, but also making sure that you stay hydrated helps with your balance and helps because after you play VR for 45 minutes or an hour and you take the headset off and your head is swimming, you're much less likely to be nauseous if you're well hydrated beforehand. So if you're
Yeah.
going to go do fun things that completely surround your sense of sight and hearing and everything with a wonderful VR headset, make sure you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
I love it. Thanks for being here, and I hope to have you all back. Dan, you can't be here next week. How long are you going to be absent?
Let me take a quick look. We will
Yeah,
talk afterwards, but yeah, this upcoming weekend, not so much. Maybe the next couple weekends, and then May and June are actually going to be pretty shot for me. I'm going to be pretty busy, but
I
hopefully we
like
can
that.
get a couple episodes in and jump back on because this is a ton of fun to come chat with you guys and just have some
Okay.
really sensible, wholesome conversation where we get to break life down a little bit. And I really appreciate contributing to the show and hopefully helping you guys succeed a little bit because I love your mission, love what you guys are doing.
Oh, people love
Happy
hearing you.
750.
Thank you. Well, that's good. I mean, hearing that Superman's going to be busy isn't alarming to me.
I'm not Superman, more like Robin.
Oh, yeah. There you go. Then
There we
who is
go.
Superman? I mean, who should we be talking to? Oh, Superman is involved in sleep studies, isn't she?
Wait, is this the Russian sleep experiment?
Yeah.
Have
Oh dear.
you guys have heard that or read that one, right? The Russian sleep
Mm-mm.
experiment.
I have
Mm-mm.
not. I've been, give us the 30-second version.
So it's a creepy pasta, so AKA online horror lore that isn't real. But the idea was is that after the Second World War, the Soviets captured a few Nazi prisoners, and they were experimenting with a sleep gas to keep the soldiers awake. The idea being that you could create a fighting force that could, sustain long periods of battle without needing sleep. Uh, TLDR, it does not go well.
Yeah.
Man. Okay.
And the thing is like I was like, it reads like something out of like the what you would expect to have happened in the 50s and 60s, like with the Soviets and our CIA and shit like that. It's really weird and creepy.
Mm,
And so but I really like horror stuff, so like it's a good one. I really enjoy that one.
I love it.
Never underestimate the power of a dude with time and a keyboard.
It's true. So true.
All right. I love you guys.
Love you guys. Take care, guys. Have fun.
Bye. Awesome.
That was fun.
So much fun.
Oh man, I really appreciate it. Yeah, so